Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com, part of the CBS Sports Podcast Network. I am Mike Casazza here for the weekly Q&A podcast with Chris Anderson. Chris, we called an audible. The thing is just too popular now. It's too much. There's so many people lining up to ask questions, which is awesome. The opposite of awesome is the fact that you and I knew the common thread for pretty much all the questions this week. So we skipped the middleman, got rid of the messenger. We're just going to ask each other questions that we figure other people are curious about too, because let's be honest, 3-5 right now as we tiptoe into November, there's pretty much one thing on the minds of most people.
Basketball?
This Perez thing, it's just got me in a pretzel. I don't get it. No. Yep.
Uh-oh. There's somebody for basketball.
Can't do this. Wow, live. We're going to
Put him on the air.
Person a message and we'll call back, okay? One sec. All right, and we're back. Anyhow, yeah. Football, immediate fate of the team, the head coach, the staff. Maybe more. We'll see. Where do we begin on where we stand right now?
Let me ask you a question, and then I'll give you a real question. Do you want to go micro or macro here? Look at the situation to start.
Start small and expand.
Okay. Let's start with one more question from the game that I had, because it's been discussed on the board. So again, we're trying to get the questions that we think the board and our members were going to ask. That final 3-4 plays, the first and goal, that again, I remember the post game and I tweeted it. The first 3 drives were, CJ Donaldson run, Justin Johnson run, touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. And then they got cute with jet sweeps, QB draws, corner fades. There seems to be just some discussion about who made those final decisions. And I don't know, because I think within the postgame we had Neil Brown talking, and he brought up that maybe the second down one, which was the JT Daniels QB draw, that was Daniels kind of calling his own shot there, that it was supposed to be a pass. And then the third down play, they called that it was supposed to be a run, but again, ended up being a pass. It was the opposite. And so are we getting down to somebody made the wrong calls, somebody made the wrong audibles there? What are we talking about on that final play? What was your final, now that we've had kind of 48 hours to figure it out? What can we say, I don't know about definitively, happened on that final first and goal drive?
I think that they probably looked into the past a little bit when things were going well, and knew they could throw fades. That worked. Back shoulder stuff. It just didn't click. And then I don't know if it's because teams are pressing them more. Maybe they're better against it, but they did succeed in that spot before. I went back and I listened to Brown. I was in the room after the game. I didn't hear him say this, but they did think that second down should have been, or the first fade should have been a run, correct? So what happens there? Because Daniels has been pretty good about making decisions, and I think they liked their run game enough at that point they could have done it. I just wonder about, just can't get past the red zone orchestration before, where they kind of handed the headset from one coach to the other, right? Remember that? Kind of an awkward thing. Did that happen again?
Are you getting conspiracy?
I'm just wondering because like a lot of people bring this up. It does seem like the offense has kind of shifted a little bit, or it's changed, or sometimes it has different stripes in different spots. And I wonder how much a head coach can completely and consistently remove himself from things. And they ran the ball determinedly, successfully early in that game in the goal line situations, and just didn't do it there. And it really came out to cost them. Like, as you pointed out, just they got out of their way on the first one and did the thing that worked. And then what wasn't consistent is what stands out. why did it stand out? Because it wasn't what it was before. It did not blend in. That's why it stands out. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Neither here. I'm trying to think of that first play because in my mind on that first corner fade, like just again watching it, and it can be, the angles and stuff on TV are different than what you think you see on TV. Again, you're there in the press box. I'm watching from afar. It looked like the run was there. Like again, it seemed like one of those read option plays where Daniels has to make the decision after the snap, or you kind of get a read of what the defense is doing. So I don't want to say you make up your mind pre-snap, but you have an inkling of what you want to do or what you think is going to happen by the defense. And if it does happen, then you let the handoff go. If it doesn't happen, then you pull it back and you throw. It looked like the run was there because the offensive line had that side sealed, and I think it was Donaldson could have just almost waltzed in, and especially with a guy his size, could have got at least closer to the goal line. And I'm just not sure it was the right decision. And I think that one right there, I don't think that's a play call. I think that was an RPO kind of call. And it was a wrong decision by the quarterback rather than a questionable play call. Which again, I think I'm as guilty of it as anybody, again, obviously in the post game and then in my live tweeting. We need to remember some of those things. Like a lot of these plays, and not a lot of these, I don't know. What do you say? Like half and half are option type plays where they have to make a decision at the line or after the snap of a run or a pass. You kind of read what the box is and then you make that play. Mm-hmm. And so it insinuates bad play calling when it might have been more of a bad decision right there.
Which is why it was curious to me that it was pretty clearly stated that was supposed to be a run play.
Yeah.
So that takes out the question as to was it a bad call or did they abandon the run because they wanted that to be a run? It comes down to the quarterback there. And again, at some point in the past year, they were good at that fade stuff and it worked. That wasn't a terrible throw. It just didn't connect. And then, the one to Prather, if you see some yellow on that play, it's a different story, right? So it's a question, I guess, for sure about who's doing what.
Yeah. And that Prather one, again, maybe that's another one. Because at the time, I was like, I don't even know if that's pass interference. I did question the fact that the corner never even turned his head around or anything. But there is no face guarding in football. They don't flag that. But, man, it's one of those. And they teach receivers to do this. They teach them. And it's difficult. I don't want to put the blame on Prather because you're also trying to catch the ball. So you're almost making a choice of what they teach the receivers to do is when that ball's coming up and you see that defensive back is not, making a play on the ball or anything, is to go back up through his body to go towards the ball so that they call pass interference. Like you're almost initiating the contact because that defensive back's running that way and you go back into their body. But you're also trying to catch the ball, and I think Prather's best chance of catching the ball was to kind of jump away from the cornerback. Had he gone up and in, it's definitely pass interference. But the fact that he kind of jumped backwards to try to make that catch, that's the problem, which again, and we said in postgame, it was a bad throw. So if it's a better throw with a little more air behind it, he's kind of slowing down, settling himself, and getting ready to jump, and the cornerback just runs him over, and it's pass interference.
I wonder about the throw. I just can't believe that Daniels whiffs on a throw like that. Like, that's a guy who, he's been throwing fades since he was like in kindergarten, right? So, and he's been very specific about opponents and matchups and certain dynamics in that one-on-one between the receiver and the corner where, it's a back shoulder here, it's a fade here, which are different things. Like a back shoulder means it's just going to a spot and you got to be there. It could be back shoulder on a pylon as opposed to a fade. There's different vocabulary and different ways to throw that too. And I wonder if there was a matchup there and then he saw something and then knew it was supposed to be, not a lofted pass, something that had a little bit more zip on it. And Prather was supposed to get himself there to be open for the catch. Now they just got their signals crossed on that because it just seems like a weird time to zip one when it required touch. And it seemed like a weird time for a receiver to think this thing and a quarterback to do the other. And I don't know, perhaps I have too much faith in Daniels, but his explanations have been impressive this year, especially when it came to how they were going to prep for specifically, those goal line plays when they're pressed up against the receiver. What do they do? And that was one of the situations where I was like, I wonder if they just got crossed up there, which doesn't forgive the problem. It just kind of underscores the frustration about they get the ball there, like all the way down there, and then one or two things go wrong, whether it's a bad pass or miscommunication, and it kind of keeps them from significant points there too. So curious timing on either a bad throw or a bad relaying of signals there too. My question for you:
Yep.
defense ends on a front foot, let's say. I know they gave up a touchdown on 4th and 1, but played better in the second half. We can agree. And then listen, everything is qualified when it comes to their defense because they're good. Their positive is still a low bar, right? I understand that. But what you saw in the second half was a slight uptick. Offensively, a bit different. You go on the road now, a winless team, 0-5 in conference play, a touchdown underdog. It's kind of a weird confluence of events. But John Heacock plays that crazy restrictive defense. Iowa State's offense has not been great. I wonder if you feel better about a defensive improvement and feel worse about the offense clicking against this defense than perhaps previously expected based on the first 7 games of the season. The 8th one kind of flips the script a little bit in a good way and a bad way. And now you're going to a team that really likes to play defense and is not great at offense. Are they kind of meeting in the middle here, so to speak?
Yeah, this is fascinating. Iowa State just fascinates the heck out of me because they have the worst offense in the Big 12, and it's not even close. You look at their scoring for the season right now. Everybody in the league has played 8 games. Everybody has played exactly 8 games now, and they have scored 173 points. The next lowest is 248 by Kansas State. But they also have the best defense in the entire Big 12, at least as far as fewest points allowed, with 133. And so this when you look at some of the other matchups, like, oh yeah, this is good on good, bad on bad, good versus bad, bad versus good, and here we are. You look, if you're Iowa State, you're thinking, oh boy, if we can't get our offense going against West Virginia's defense, then you really know there's problems. And then West Virginia, you're thinking, man, if the defense can't have at least a halfway decent game against this terrible Iowa State offense, there's even worse problems than we already thought. So I don't know who what do we call it? The get right game? Who gets right? Like, is it West Virginia's defense gets right, or is it Iowa State's offense that gets right? Or what happens when you have West Virginia's offense, which again can be up and down? Like, it's been good at times. Again, first half amazing, second half kind of pretty much terrible. And there's been kinks in the armor. And will those show again for longer stretches against a team like Iowa State who, looking at it, their worst game, at least as far as points allowed, was against Baylor. 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, and they only gave up 24 points. If West Virginia scores 24 points, I don't think they win the game. I don't think they can win a game where they score 24 points, even if they're against an offense as bad as Iowa State.
Hard to disagree at this point in the season, too. Very curious about the kickoff time, too. It's an ESPN Plus game. Iowa State gets to pick the kickoff time. Didn't go for noon. Didn't go for a night game. I get that, but 3:30. So not a tough one for West Virginia and probably in the comfort zone for Iowa State. I always find that decision interesting because you can pick your time when you have ESPN Plus, and they picked nothing advantageous. I think if West Virginia had a team coming from far away like TCU, for example, that noon is kind of an interesting start. But nobody wants a noon home game when you have a choice. So again, maybe a bigger deal to someone like me who's going to be up later than he wants to be Saturday night.
All right, you ready to get a little more bigger picture? I think the ones that are probably going to be asked even more often on the message board.
Let's do it.
Okay. I think the one I've seen most frequently, because our statements and our info over the last several weeks have been consistent. That decision on Neil Brown's future would rather it not be during the season, and if it is, it would be much later in the season, maybe even after being officially ruled out of a bowl game. A lot of people asking 3-5, going to be underdog or worse favorites in the remaining 4 games. Why delay what seems like, or at least what they're assuming is inevitable? Mike, what is the benefit if they're making that decision? If they are making that decision, what is the benefit of waiting a couple more weeks?
Two things. One, I, Mike Casaza, am no longer as confident in that stance. You and
There
I
you go.
talked Saturday evening, and we got a little bit worried about some stuff.
Yes.
Leave it at that. So things changed. Listen, there was a lot of patience when they were 0-2, and there was optimism and patience. I understand that, but like time changes, and when time doesn't change enough, you change what you can change, which is the way you feel about the situation. So when you're not getting the progress, the improvement, the change that you hope for, when you cross your fingers at 0-2, when the product isn't changing it, when the product doesn't change how you feel, you change how you feel about the product. That is inevitable. I think there's more of that now than there was certainly 5 weeks ago. But I think when you look at going on the road and playing good teams and beating good teams, that's tricky. And I wonder if, Chris, beating Baylor isn't a little bit like beating Oklahoma State in 2013. You look at it and you go, how the heck did that happen? How the heck did they beat Baylor? Which kind of had its way for most of the game against the Texas Tech offense that had a track meet against West Virginia that we saw. So I'm not as confident in that 7th loss position anymore, because I think if you get to 6, again, if you're really straining to talk yourself into 6 wins and 6 losses, and then you kind of have to think about what happens then. And 6-6, hey, cool, bowl game. I don't know that bowl games are weird. I know what you think about this, Chris. Perhaps you can calibrate me on this, but like I think that should be a minimum now, because so many teams get into a bowl and there's so many bowl spots. But also it doesn't mean a whole lot either. So I don't know. It feels like the least thing you can do, but it's also literally the least thing you can do as far as achievements go. Just get into 6 wins. So suppose they're 6-6. Are they throwing a party about being bowl eligible in year 4? Probably not. And then you kind of buckle up for December. Can you trust good players to stay? I don't know how you can, based on what you've seen the last couple of off seasons. Can you trust the transfer portal to supplement your losses? I don't know how you can, based on what you've seen the past couple of off seasons. Staffing decisions have to be made. Offensive line, quarterbacks coach, and running backs coach. I believe those are the 3 that are on 1-year contracts. So can you bring them all back? Can you get the right hires? There's a lot of stuff that would be up in the air. And then I just wonder if people are going to be like, what are we doing here? Are we thinking that a 7th win in a bowl game against some, low-level Big Ten team, Pac-12 team? I have to look at the matchups here, like what the possibilities are. But like, does that change things? And if you lose it, what do? Do you get back into January 1st of 2022 where you're like, oh no, we are in a, using the head coach's word here, crisis? Do you want to do that again? Or do you just kind of create the crisis that you can control by making a change? And I think that the logic has changed a whole lot now. It's very easy to put that 7th loss as some sort of a bookend when it's far away. When it comes closer and you start to think about the reality of the situation, a 6th loss, a 7th loss, an 8th and 9th loss doesn't look that much different, I think.
This is going to sound like a weird comparison, but I'm glad you just phrased it the way you did just now. I was talking with someone, not a capital S someone, but just about the situation, and I essentially said the same thing. It was like, yeah, early on it was kind of like, hey, trying to wait till the end of the season to do it, trying to wait till at least, if they don't make it to a bowl game kind of thing, get to 7 losses. And this person said, guys, you sounded like him when he was trying to pay off his mortgage. And was like, yeah, just this much longer to go. And then, but once you got down into the last couple of years, like, I just really want to just pay it off, just finish it and pay it off, and pay it a lump sum, and just rip the Band-Aid off and get it over with. And I mean, I don't know. I still got a long way to go on my mortgage, so I don't know what that's like. But
say, who is this guy?
Yeah,
can he call the Mac?
Yeah, but that was what I was thinking. Was yeah, I think a couple weeks ago I was like, yeah, you get it down there. But now that you're 3-5, and again, as you're staring at it, going, all right, this is the most winnable game remaining on the schedule, is a trip to Iowa State, where you are an underdog against a team that has not won a Big 12 conference game yet. That's not great. And so, yeah, I think the more the losing has happened, the more the timeline has been expedited, and the more stringent things are going to be about this. There's something else you said in there, got me thinking. It's kind of a different question, but obviously very much related. You said bowl game, like bare minimum these days, right? Like 6-6 is pretty much bare minimum. And somebody had asked me, what are the expectations? Like, I think are West Virginia fans spoiled from essentially like a decade and a half of really, really good football? Like there. I mean, it's West Virginia football has always been good with the occasional great year or stretches. But then obviously that, 2004-ish range to, 2018, like you're talking like 15 years of exciting football and football where you are competing for conference titles. So did that change everybody's expectations? Did that throw them out of whack? Did that make people raise the bar too high for what West Virginia football should be? And just saying that comment, I probably pissed off about 1 million people because West Virginia fans, are expecting greatness. And I think a realistic expectation of a football coach at WVU, especially with the upcoming Big 12 changes, is over like a 5-year stretch, kind of looking at it as like a whole class or whole chance to recruit and fill your roster and all that stuff. So 5 years, which would be this is the 5th year of Neil Brown, is maybe 2 years of around 500 ball, 2 years of a little more competitive, and then 1 or 2 years where you are legitimately competing for a conference championship, where you have to build the roster up. And I think that hasn't happened during these 5 years. But Mike, is that an unrealistic expectation? What would your 5-year expectation be for a WVU football coach?
I think that's fair. I mean, I think the Big 12 is going to be easier to win with Texas and Oklahoma out of the way. I don't think there's much about that. And then some teams are going to benefit from that power vacuum. I don't know how many teams that would be. I think you could certainly say Oklahoma State would be one. The rest of the Big 12, don't know. We'll see. But that's the team that's been positioned for so long with the head coach. They've been there across different little phases of the Big 12. So that power vacuum, I think that scoops them up. Point being that who else gets scooped up? Is it, let's say that there's 3 or 4 teams that benefit. Who's in line and where is West Virginia in line? It's hard to put them in the benefiting position right now of moving up because someone moves out. Everybody will a little bit, but there are teams that are going to make leaps. And when you look at what Kansas State is doing, what Kansas is doing, TCU, I would think that they have as good a shot as anybody to make a leap in the Big 12 on that power vacuum. So I'm going to get to your answer, Chris, but I go back to this. An expectation is maybe artificially existing because of that great run in that 2004 era that you mentioned, right? But on the cusp of the national championship, the Fiesta Bowl win, a lot of offensive talent coming back, which was the identity of the program at that point. They make let's just say a controversial decision as to who's going to be their coach. He wins 9 games in 3 seasons, and he's gone. And then you have 8 years of Dana Holgorsen being up and down. More up than down, but up and down. Briefly had them in some Big 12 championship conversation. But think about the contract extension and how kind of tumultuous that was in 2016. What frustrated people then was what was good enough? What was the goal? What was something that you could reward and what was something that you should avoid? It took 10 wins to get that contract extension done. Don't forget that. And then now, the goalposts have moved quite a bunch these past 4 years. But can you trace it back 15 years and say, boy, they never really, if they got out and had a serious, deep head coaching search and got somebody who was going to keep it going forward, and all of a sudden that became a bigger deal because of that decision. All of a sudden that 2004 era continued on for some number of years. That 2017 came back and they won, I don't know, let's just say they won 12, 11, and 10 games the next 3 years because they had a good guy in charge. Well, all of a sudden you know what that program does. Did they Did they leave in a limbo by promoting Bill Stewart? Maybe. But also, what did Bill Stewart do that was so bad? Won 9 games 3 years in a row. Not the best competition. I understand that. But what was the goal? Never stated. Fulgerson era, goals, never really stated. Brown era, goals, never really stated. Now would be a good time to have an answer for that question, don't you think? Like, it's there now where you're in this, the cement's wet, put your feet in there. What's it going to look like? Does it have to be 10 wins? Do you have to compete? 10 wins, once every 4 years and compete for a Big 12. I don't know. We'll see. That's been a question mark for a while. I think minimum in a 4-year cycle, you should be playing significant football in November a couple of times, and maybe you should be making one trip to Dallas. If not, you're in that conversation. Like, all right, if they win this game, this team loses, they're in Dallas for the Big 12 championship game. I think that conference championships are the goal if you're in a Power 5 conference. They're not easy to get to, but you need to be able to take a swing at it. More often than not, I don't know, but more often than they have.
Can't say I disagree there. I can't say I disagree. Only hiccup here. Setting those hard line goals or, must-haves or whatever you want to call them, that can make things complicated. And we've talked about it. Not that it's like, hey, you need to compete for conference championships. I think if you say compete for conference championships, that is at least ambiguous enough, or like, hey, we were 8-4, and the team that made the Big 12 championship game was 9-3, so we're close. The two teams that made it 9-3 and 10-2, so we quote unquote competed. When does the line of competing start and end? Are you in it until the final week? Are you actually in the game? Did you compete, or were you in it until 3 weeks left? I think you still have some kind of unknown with that, some flexibility with that, but the hard line stances make it more difficult. But then again, like you said, if you don't have a set goal, if you don't make it publicly known, it starts shifting. And now it's shifted again. We went from, 9 wins wasn't good enough. Okay. Noted. Big East Conference, nowhere near the same level of competition. There were games that they should have never lost. Like, I feel like there was I know it was only 3 years, but I think there was 8 games against Syracuse that they probably should have won that they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And this is different, but we've now shifted these goalposts so far that we're staring at, hey, get to 6-6 in year 5. Yeah. No, we're a decade removed from firing somebody for going, was it 27-9 or whatever it was, 27-10, 3 was it 9-4 every single year, so 27-12.
Mm-hmm.
Again, different circumstances, but this is a heck of a shift in the goalpost situation here.
Look at the Big 12 too, and just the roster of teams, and it's not a perfect season for this because, for example, Oklahoma hasn't done it. Oklahoma State has not probably been as good as it could have been given the way that the top has unfolded this year. But look at TCU, Kansas State, with, one of the more surprising outcomes in the country this year, probably, I would think. When you look at that score, Baylor getting it together, Texas smokes Oklahoma, Kansas had a win at West Virginia, 5-0 start. Texas Tech has had some good moments. Like, the only two teams that really haven't had an outcome this year that contributes to the dynamic that is the Big 12 are maybe Baylor. The game is it for West Virginia, and it's just Iowa State that hasn't contributed to it. But a lot of stuff is possible, and West Virginia hasn't made it happen. And that may be the difference of quantitative analysis here, Chris, is that they got one, it was a home game, it was great, but what happened after that? Popped a tire in the first half against Texas Tech, and then lost a home game against TCU, which, again, losing to an undefeated top 10 team at home, it's a tough one to hold against a team, but magic hadn't happened nearly enough. And if you try to go over Brown's great wins, it's not going to take you too long, unfortunately for him, and that's just the state of the program. But I think if they're more competitive in some of these games, and they do climb a few rungs on the ladder, and I don't know how high it's supposed to go or how high they think it will go, but I guess you could say they haven't even embarked on that mission so far. And I don't want to use the word that begins with a C and has 5 letters and you're supposed to trust, because that would be kind of trite. But have they really embarked on that to get to a level that they want to? like if we don't know the destination, well, maybe it's because the journey hasn't really started or it hasn't escalated or elevated as much as they wanted to, and that could be as much a problem as anything else. We'll see. Chris, my last one for you.
Uh-huh.
Again, this is one of those things that sounded great 5-6 weeks ago. Now doesn't sound so bad, or when you look at how things have unfolded and where they are right now. But given the transfer portal, given recruiting is maybe not different, but you're still a Power 5 program that's going to have scholarships and going to play in a conference that should be fun. NIL's there. There's good things about being even a bad team in a Power 5 conference or a team that's not winning a lot. But portal, recruiting, assistance, NIL, staffing, all that stuff, variables you can control and manipulate. To make a head coaching change, you cause a lot of ripples in waters that you'd prefer to have run still, right? I think anybody would tell you change is not great. You'd rather not make changes, but sometimes you have no choice. But what's the cost, the price, not dollar sign, but in collateral damage and perception and recruiting and marketing, whatever, and turning over a coaching staff? This would be 4 and 15 years. That's a big number. And while maybe it is easier to build a roster, it's also easier for others to build a roster too at your expense. My question, I guess, in a much longer format, down to a few words here, is why might somebody dread having to make a change and not want to? And then if you do, what are you looking at when you do make a change?
Let's start with the recruiting part of this, like as far as the guys that are committed but not yet in the program. You can't take that in as a factor. Let me give an example here. And this is, obviously this hasn't happened too much to West Virginia over the years. There's only been the one coaching change in the last dozen years. But we've seen it with other programs. We've seen it a little bit at West Virginia because of like assistant coaches. And again, those are the guys that the players are building their relationships with most. You will hear them mention Neil Brown. You will hear them mention other, but they're building their relationships with the assistant coaches, with the recruiting coordinators. Now, yes, again, some of those guys will probably be gone too with Neil Brown, but it is a situation where I'm looking at it right now, 18 commitments in West Virginia's class. In general, speaking of generalities here, not talking about specific players that are in this class, but in general, say a class of 18 players, and there is a coaching change. 12 of those 18 will stick with West Virginia pretty much no matter what. Maybe 10 of 18 will stick with West Virginia no matter what. And then another 3 or 4 will teeter-totter, maybe decommit, see another school, but then come back and meet the new coaches and the new coaching staff and will recommit. So you're talking like 13 out of the 18, maybe 14 out of the 18 will still be in the class. On top of that, whoever you bring in is then going to bring in a bunch of other potential exciting players with their own connections. They might bring them from the school that they're currently committed to elsewhere. They might bring them as uncommitted players that are going to come over. One of the first ones I remember was when Tony Gibson came back to West Virginia a decade ago. And as soon as he got there, all of a sudden West Virginia is being connected to these guys that were committed to Arizona. And you may remember one of them, Mario Alford, who ended up being pretty darn good. And again, those are the kind of things that can happen. There's still like the hit on recruiting is not going to, like, you're talking not that drastic, or it shouldn't be. It might feel like it at first. It might seem like it. You might have a rash of decommits and then guys recommit and stuff. But a lot of these guys are going to take a more measured approach and really evaluate who's going to be the new coaches and stuff. Again, I know I said I'm speaking in generalities here, but let's take, for example, Rodney Gallagher. He picked West Virginia because he lives 30 minutes away. He likes West Virginia. His family, his mother graduated from West Virginia. Like, he's built an amazing relationship with Dante Wright, who's been his lead recruiter. He's built a nice relationship with Tony Washington. He's built a nice relationship with Neil Brown and several other staff members. But if all of those guys were gone, I still think there is a real possibility, a likelihood actually, of him being at WVU. The new quarterback commit, Sean Boyle. His whole family went to West Virginia. He grew up going to all the games at West Virginia. He decommitted from Charlotte and committed to West Virginia like within days of getting the offer. I don't think a coaching change is going to, affect him. Go down the line. Corey McIntyre, WVU legacy. Noah Bram, WVU legacy. Torrey Johnson, WVU legacy. Like, are these guys really going to jump ship because of a coaching change? Unlikely. So again, you're talking at least half the class will stick around, likely more. The big issue is transfers, like the guys that are currently in the program, because we saw this offseason massive departures, and some of them were because their position coach or their lead recruiter left to go somewhere else. We don't need to rehash that and the coach that's currently in Miami, but that's something that's going to happen. That is something that you got to be concerned about. But again, as you noted, it'll be easier to rebuild with your own transfers. But that's would be my biggest concern is those guys that are like freshmen, sophomores who are already contributors on the program leaving because of the coaching change. That would be the area where you really need to kind of tighten up and keep those guys together and in the program.
I don't think you can be scared of making the change because you might be bad for a couple of years because I don't think the public can or should buy that much more. When you look around at other teams, how quickly they've turned it around in the conference and beyond, it just doesn't seem like that should not be the roadblock, I don't think. Because if you're in a bad spot, why would you be worried about a bad spot? You can continue on willingly in a bad spot, or you can volunteer, I guess, welcome a bad spot, but you also have much more control over the solution when you willingly enter the phase where you can change things.
Well, and I think that's, again, this is part of what has bothered people so much with this, because look at how quickly some of these other programs are turning it around with their coaches. You look at it, TCU, first year head coach right there. This is not the same roster, but they got rid of Gary Patterson and boom, they're winning. They're number 7 in the country. They're undefeated. Kansas has gone from a perennial doormat to a team that's going to finish around 500 in Leipold's second year, right? Mm-hmm. Texas Tech, the team that just destroyed West Virginia. Another young coach that's only in his first or second year. You just keep going up and down the line. There are teams right here in this conference that West Virginia is facing week after week after week that you're not hearing, we're short on depth. We had a lot of transfers. We're a young and inexperienced team. It's just year 1, year 2, and they've got to turn around and they're cooking and they're winning. And I think when that's happening right in front of your face, it kind of magnifies the issues that you're having in your own backyard.
Well, there we have it. Questions overlapping, hopefully, with what the listeners and subscribers want. Answers, you're probably not going to get the answer for a while. But who knows? I think, Chris, though, that is, go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted you made me think about the answer that you want. And this is something that I just want to say in general to everybody listening, to all the fans, to our VIP members, to, again, the people that just listen to the podcast. If something comes up, please, if something happens as far as a coaching change, please try to, this is going to be, I know this is asking a lot, try to remove yourself or your desires for what's going to happen with what's actually happening. I think there are so many people, especially these last couple of weeks with some of the rumors that were being, talked about and potential coaches and stuff like that, that it was a situation where we gave them the answers, you and I, of what this, hey, it's kind of a wait and see. Remember, I think it was like the Virginia Tech game, like people were already talking about him getting fired. And you and I were on the podcast, be like, it just, you guys are way ahead of schedule here. Just chill. But people didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to hear that, even though it was the truth. They didn't want to hear that a decision wasn't made yet. So they went and found the truth that they wanted and went that way. Try not to do that moving forward, because I think there's going to be a lot of stuff thrown out, and there's going to be a lot of reasons things are thrown out, but you need to wait and listen and find a trustworthy news source. I will obviously promote our site and Mike and the information and point to what happened the last time there was a coaching change and how on it everything was. But just because the answer is not what you want to hear doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
Also, rule of thumb, these things happen at night. It just never fails. They happen at night. I don't know what it is. People hang out, brown liquids, dinners, they go home, put the family to bed, they get back to their hotel room. I don't know what it is, but there's like a witching hour. It never, ever, ever fails. So I'm not saying that if you see something at like noon, it's wrong. But if you see something like 9 p.m., don't dismiss that either, because it just seems like these things happen that night. And that was as true Saturday a couple of days ago as it probably will be whenever there's white smoke or black smoke coming out of the Pushkar Center. We'll see. But don't know why, but it's always at night. It always never fails.
You may have been texting and calling me, and I'm just standing in the middle of a large gymnasium at my wife's 20-year reunion. Like, seriously? Not right now. Everybody stop it.
Oh gosh, can't do this again. Can't do it. But we will. Maybe. We'll see. We'll be up in the watchtower, keeping an eye over the land below us and trying to see what the future holds for us. Oh my God, Chris, this is not great. Until then, I'm Mike Casazza.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We will talk to you then.